Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. It's good to have you here today. Just by way of quick things, I'm going to go to banners. As was mentioned, it looks like Logos Bible Software has a special thing going. I have not put it in the description of this one. It should end up appearing on the YouTube chat, so you can feel free to check it out. And actually, Slam RN had more information than I did, so that's really kind of exciting. She is in the know. She was the first one that I saw that did a like. Someone else did a like, but YouTube has not felt inclined to acquiesce to demonstrate that at this time. I'm sure that will change. I really appreciate the likes. So as you come in, feel free to like it. We're going to be continuing the Olivet discourse. Now, I'm not doing a detailed thing. My friend Bobby in Brooklyn, who did Matthew through Jewish eyes, would probably be all in there and do a deeper detailed thing. I'm not doing that, but tonight we're going to hit on the use of Daniel in Matthew, and we're going to talk about some ways that this passage is looked at. Now, I gave you the clue. I'm premillennial dispensational. I'll talk about all three, and then we'll take a look at how Daniel is used in Matthew and the struggle that really this section of Scripture really provides. So we're going to switch to the PowerPoint. I don't need to share a clip. I just need to screen share the PowerPoint. So I'm going to put that up there. I'm going to shrink Mia down a little bit so that you can see. You know, of all the characters that I have as virtual helpers, I think this guy looks the most like me, except for the glasses. You can comment on that. I can put us side by side here, and we can do a little thing. Yeah, I mean, you know, if the beard's trimmed, I think we're pretty much there. So I've decided to call this character, Nissen, for lack of a better name. And, you know, I kind of like the tie. The dress code's pretty decent, although I don't possess a white one. And so we're going to start looking at the, I'm doing a lot of the us tonight. We're going to start looking at the Olivet discourse. So let me click on here. Okay. One of the big problems here that you have to deal with is that there are general references, but there are kind of a specific period looked at where these things are going to culminate. And so you move from a general view, which talks about after the temple is destroyed, before the temple is destroyed, that sort of thing, that, you know, what the disciples immediately are going to face. And then you have a long-range view. So you have a sort of a short-range view and a long-range view. And by the way, this is characteristic, really, of Old Testament prophecy. You have short-range fulfillments and then long-range fulfillments. Someone would say, why does God do that sort of thing? Well, the reason that he does that sort of thing, quite frankly, is because how do you know someone's a prophet? Now think about this. They have to teach consistent with the word that has already been revealed. So there has to be a consistency of revelation. But they're giving new information about future events. There are a host of people making predictions. I remember, whether you like it or not, there were a host of quote unquote New Testament prophets that came out and said a lot about the future results of the election. And so why would I not believe them? Now, there are reasons for the canon being closed and some discussion around that. But let's assume for a minute that I was walking around during that time period and there was a person who began preaching and began giving, thus saith the Lord. We're not talking about preaching in the sense of explaining what the word says and applying. We're talking about thus saith the Lord and giving new revelation. The The immediate fulfillment would give credence to the fact that they were indeed a prophet, according to Deuteronomy 18 through 20. This thing came to pass. And so that's not surprising. But the problem with the Olivet Discourse is it does the same sort of thing. And so there's a sense in which the disciples are going to be hounded. And there's a sense in which future followers are going to be hounded. And it seems to be a little difficult. And as I was talking to my dear brother, Mike Wingfield, who really specializes in this particular part of the Bible, that was one of the things we talked about long distance for quite a while. So let me move on here and click. But just realize this exegetical hard part here. Okay, I'm going to bring this back up again here. Jesus is not telling the disciples they will not experience some of these things. Quite the contrary. But we do know there's a period that's going to be characterized by these things to the nth degree. Just to demonstrate, let's look at Revelation 6:2. I'm going to turn here, and I'm going to kind of open it up here, and then I'll jump back. I'm going to bring this up because, as you know, Logos does not always show the thing in the largest sense. And I'm so glad I found that you can do this cool thing with Logos, where you can make the text bigger. Okay. We are dealing in a part of Scripture here that is going to let us know that some of the things talked about in this very section are yet future. Okay. Now I'm doing some connecting of Scripture here. Just to let you know, the lamb is not a lamb. The lamb is a reference when John uses it to Jesus. There are a series of seals mentioned in 6 that go back to the title deed for the earth or for maybe like the world, the universe. There's exegetical discussion. Documents were sealed in the ancient days. And so there's this picture that the lamb is able to open the seals. And then the seals are connected to these first 7 seals. Now, what I want to show you is that there are a connection between these seals and events on earth. So while the Lamb opens the seals in heaven, there are earthly ramifications to these. I looked, and behold, a white horse who sat upon it was given a bow, and a crown was given him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Now, the mistake most people would make there is they'd immediately assume it was Jesus. A white horse is associated with a conquering individual, but there is every reason to believe that this really isn't meant to be a picture of the Lamb who's busy opening the seals. Do remember that during the first 3.5 years, if you follow prophecy, you have an individual that seems to come to power. This is talked about also in Daniel chapter 11. Revelation is the least unique book, someone has said, in the entire New Testament. Now, what I want you to see that there's a first seal here. There's a second seal. It seems to be connected with something. The second seal is connected with another horseman. This is sometimes called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. This horse is a different color, differentiates him very nicely. And he is able to take peace from the world, and people should kill one another. And he's given a great sword. So what we're talking about is war. Okay. And rumors of war, interestingly enough. The third seal is a black horse, and we have famine. And a special shout out to Jimmy Ivy. And I gotta say hi. I can't not say hi. That would be impolite. So let me go ahead and do that. Now, in this section, I just want you to see that there's this other horseman who's connected with famine. Okay. Now, this isn't the Olivet Discourse, but remember that Jesus is not just referring to the immediate things around the temple, but there are future things, and he sort of mixes them because the characteristics that are going to be true in relation to the destruction of the temple and the period immediately after are going to be characterized to the nth degree by this period that is often called the tribulation. And this famine is so bad that a day's wages, I think a denarius was a day's wages, would be worth a quart of wheat. We can't even imagine that. Do understand that the things he's describing are absolutely horrendous and would make the COVID thing look almost like a light pleasantry. There's a pale horse called Death, and Hades followed after him. And Hades is the abode of the dead in Greek thinking. And a fourth of the earth is killed with the sword, with hunger, and with death. Now, why did I do this? Why did I take you on this merry discussion of Revelation? Because I want you to see a tie-in. 6:2 through 4 indicates that there's going to be a period of time yet to come that these things are going to be not only existing, like in the period before the destruction of the temple and after, but to the nth degree. Now, Rome experienced several bouts with plagues. Around the time of Diocletian, there was a plague. People died. In fact, Christians were noted for caring for the sick that were laying in the streets, that were Romans, who were dying of diseases when these plagues hit, when even Romans would not take care of them. And it was said that the Christians take better care of our sick than we do. By the way, that's really neat to keep in track of in terms of testimony. We might have done better to leave gospel tracts in bags of groceries, mask up, and go out and get people some food as a testimony than some of the other things that went on. So Jesus is not saying to the disciples these conditions won't exist, heading up to the destruction of the temple and beyond, but there is a period of time when these things will exist to an nth degree. And so we're going to have to end up hitting that. And so, again, I'm just saying there's a period of time coming when these things will be characterized. A lot of this is going to hinge on our understanding of Daniel. And I almost wish that Sister Elizabeth was here because she's been sitting with a Jews for Jesus person who's been teaching through Daniel. Incredible study, fun to do. And we're going to hit on Daniel because the reference to Daniel is going to be key for understanding some things. And we're going to do that in short order. I do want you to pick up some phraseology here. The beginning of sorrows. What is this beginning of sorrows? What would be understood? Is there any sort of parallel that people would get in Matthew 24:8? There's a close corollary between the phrase beginning of sorrows and the beginning in the rabbinical writings of what are known as the birth pangs of Messiah. Although it's hard to pin down the rabbinical writings, many of them mention a period of extreme suffering and war prior to the appearance of Messiah to take up his rule. This is especially true at Qumran, where they talked about a great war between the sons of darkness and the sons of light prior to the ushering in of the kingdom of God on earth. So the disciples would have had some possible familiarity with this type of language and the idea that there will be a cataclysm that will usher in the period of Messiah's rule on earth. Now, one of the things described in this passage is a falling away. Now, where did I get this from? Well, let me go back to the passage here and jump us going forward here, okay? Here's our beginning of sorrows. And many will deliver you up to tribulation. Don't be mistaken here. The term tribulation does not have to refer to the Great Tribulation. Whatever your position is, and we'll talk about the different positions, I want you to know that the term tribulation can be used in a more general fashion. Now, there's places where a tribulation such as never has been seen or will be seen again is mentioned, like in Daniel 12, and that is more in line with a great tribulation. But the idea that tribulation could occur, they will kill you. Well, who's you? Well, let me go here to you. We want to put you here, okay? And we want to look at you. Now, I'm going to reduce this a little so you can look at who you is. Okay, so I'm going to go to about 150 power here. Okay, because I want you to be you. See that? That's the Greek word for you there. And when I click on this, okay, I can see that it's a personal second person, but it's plural. So it's yous guys. So let me put yous guys back in the passage. They will deliver yous guys up to tribulation and kill yous guys, and yous guys will be hated by all the nations for my name's sake. Now, the immediate reference has to be to the immediate disciples that Jesus is talking to, but they're going to be disciples after these disciples. Guess what? You wouldn't be sitting here if that wasn't true. And so there's a discussion of tribulation and persecution as it relates to the immediate disciples and the disciples after them. And ultimately, there will be followers of Jesus who will come to faith during the tribulation period. In fact, here's a shocker for you. The tribulation period is going to be a period of intense tribulation and also intense revival. Because if you look at Revelation, you see that there are a ton of individuals that are saints that come out of the tribulation period who come to believe in Jesus. And by the way, I hate to say it, being allergic to pain myself, that trouble and tribulation and problems is usually a prelude to revival. I had some of the best spiritual conversations I've ever had with my dad during this period of COVID. So really, that's the good side. The downside is it's miserable to live through times like this. Many will be offended. Now, I want to focus on that word offended here. That is the word scandalon. It's the word we get scandal from. Michael Card did a wonderful song. He will be the truth and will offend them one and all. A stone which makes men stumble and a rock which makes them fall. The name of the song is called Scandalon. From this very Greek word, many will be offended and will betray one another and hate one another. By the way, this is scary. We aren't necessarily I don't believe we're in the tribulation period as far as the actual great tribulation period. Although I believe many believers are experiencing intense tribulation. But as far as people betraying one another, I can see that coming down the pike very easily. False prophets will rise and deceive many. We talked about that. That occurred in the days of the disciples. Remember, Paul runs into one of these false prophets, Simon Magus. We see that in 600 with the rise of Muhammad. Because of lawlessness, that's the word we get antinomianism from. We talked about antinomianism yesterday. Antinomian, lawlessness will abound. Now, I think there's a case in which that will be true on a global sort of scale to the nth degree, but I dare say that lawlessness is beginning to abound. And the result of this is that the love of many will grow cold. People will become loveless in the face of the moral contradiction that they see. And by the way, that really affects the human heart. And it really affects my heart because I'm very order and balance oriented. And so lawlessness really bugs me. So this is a controversial verse. He endures to the end will be saved. I want to tell you what the verse doesn't say. It doesn't say he who does not endure to the end will not be saved. So I don't want to infer more than the verse says. But we know that those who come through this will indeed be redeemed. The word for saved there can have the idea for rescued. Also, it's sozo, and it's used. This verse often gives people trouble. I assure you the gospel will be preached among all the nations. But as my friend Mike Wingfield pointed out, that actually occurs in the book of Revelation, where an angel proclaims the gospel to all the nations of the earth at once. So I'm sure this is true. We just have a problem dealing with the when. What we do end up seeing is a clear reference to Daniel. So I think it's time that we spent some time. As far as apostasy, I did want to point out, we are seeing apostasy in our day. I'm amazed at the number of Christians that have fallen away, quote unquote, the number of people that name Christ that have fallen away from the faith. And one of the big ones was Josh Harris, who kissed dating goodbye and then later on kissed Jesus goodbye. So we do see these sorts of things in our day. They will be much huger. Can I even say English, much huger? During this intense period. So yes, we're seeing some of these, and it's a good warning for us. As we approach that period of time, I expect these things to increase. And so I am not shocked by them. I am not put out in the sense of, although I'm bugged by them, they are not unexpected. And we're seeing them, but they will be super prevalent during this later time, which means that now that we've ended up hitting Daniel, which is the next verse, is going to reference Daniel, it's time that I get into some views that are out there. There are several views as relates to the tribulation connected with different schools of thought. And you might as well know which school of thought, which view is connected with. I mean, there's no reason not to know this. So let me define these for you. Lexham's Survey of Theology. Now, I cut my teeth on some of this stuff. Early on, in fact, I had Daniel in a seminary type level course brought to a church before I ever had Daniel under Arnold Fruchtenbaum. And I had Daniel under Arnold Fruchtenbaum. Pre-tribulationists believe in a pre-tribulation rapture of the church. This view is becoming very unpopular. Sad to say that William Lane Craig took some pot shots that I don't think were real deserved at this view. I'm just defining it for you. If it's old news, hang in with me. But one of the reasons for this view is the prophecy in Daniel 9, which states that there'll be a future 7-year period of tribulation. We're going to talk about why I think this is so, but this seems to indicate it. And so with this view in mind, this particular school believes that the church will be raptured prior to that period of 7 years that is connected with Daniel's 70 weeks of sevens. There are other verses, such as 1 Thessalonians, which talks about this whole section. Revelation 3:10 refers to one of the churches and says that they will be kept from the hour of trial, which is associated with the tribulation by many. That's the pre-trib position. You need to be aware of it. So if I say I'm pre-trib, this is the kind of school of thought that I hold to. Okay? But I'm not the only one out there. So let me be honest and forthright and give you the opportunity to know there are some others. Now, this is the one I take the greatest umbrage with. Okay, and I have to let you know that I don't like preterism. Okay, I'm going to be honest about it. I don't like it. I see major problems with it. I know they're dear brothers and sisters. One whose apologists I deal with all the time, but I don't buy preterism. Now, under this, the prophecies in Matthew 24 and 25 and Revelation 6 through 18 have already been accomplished. It's all done. Revelation 6 through 9 is not a prediction about anything that is future. So they've already been accomplished. In fact, there's an extreme form of preterism that holds that all New Testament prophecies have already been fulfilled. So there is no future prophecy, really, in a very real sense. Yes. Someone's pointing out Michael Brown. I haven't read the book. I'm disappointed because when we go through Daniel, I wouldn't understand why Michael Brown would come to a position like this. These are both solid scholars. But in Michael Brown's case, I don't know why this sort of anti-view has really taken over. What Dr. Michael Brown would not be is a preterist. Okay? So me and Michael Brown would agree on not liking preterism. And let me just show you who made the comment, because it's not fair that I start talking. Okay? I don't buy it. And we'll talk about why I don't buy it. But in all fairness, we have to acknowledge that. Well, someone thinks he made a solid case. Let me make a case as to why I don't buy it. Why I don't think that my understanding of Israel's place really fits in well with it. I think it may seem solid, but I think there are overarching things going on. Post-tribulation is different. Now, that lost steam during World War II. Because really that view is sometimes held by those who are open to what's called historic premillennialism. By the way, vocab would be historic premillennial. It maintains that the church will pass through the tribulation prior to being removed by Christ. The church will be protected by God, but the church will not experience the wrath of God. They don't think the church will be raptured. They don't really think, that there'll be a rapture per se, which is what William Lane Craig has problems with. A less popular perspective is, of course, the partial rapture theory, where good believers will be raptured out and the lukewarm believers will suffer the tribulation. I do not buy pre-trib rapture at all. The church is the bride of Christ, and Jesus is not going to cut parts off his bride. Okay. Now that's a short one-liner, but I have a problem with the idea of the church being both in and out at the same time. Okay. And so we've covered this section before, but I want you to note some things in this section that you didn't see before, where Daniel is discussed. We haven't really gotten to that. That's verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, standing in the holy place, whosoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. Let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath, for there will be a great tribulation, or there'll be great tribulation, as such has not been since the beginning of the world until that time, no, nor has ever been, unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. For the elect's sake, those days are shortened. So this is a clear reference to Daniel's 70 weeks of 7. Okay. Now, what is this abomination of desolation stuff? I preached on Daniel 9 several times. In fact, many times throughout my ministry career. In its basic definition, we can say that it points to a desecration of the temple. It's mentioned in Matthew, it's mentioned in Mark, but this sort of terminology also appears in 1 Maccabees 1:54. Okay. This is out of the Apocrypha, where I'm actually quoting Maccabees. Wow, do I take that now or do I take that later? You're hitting on the very point. It wouldn't matter if we were pregnant if we get raptured, but it would matter if someone who was part of Israel and not part of the church got pregnant. So you're going to have to ask yourself who is in mind when Jesus is giving this information and who is not in mind when Jesus is giving this information. And you've touched on one of the glaring points here. Now, what we do need to understand is the abomination of desolation is used in Maccabees, and I quote Robert Henry Charles, where he quotes First Maccabees. Okay. Now, when it's used in Daniel and First Maccabees, what does the abomination of desolation refer to? Something that will happen to Israel, not something that will happen to the church. So we need to ask ourselves an important question. When we see a terminology, who does the terminology refer to? Well, the terminology has nothing to do with the church. It has to do with the desecration of a physical temple. Why is Jesus warning his disciples about an abomination of desolation that has little or nothing to do with the church? Who are these disciples? Well, they may be the core of the church, but they're also Jews, very much concerned about the temple. Is there any indication at all that anyone other than Antiochus Epiphanes will desecrate the temple? What is this desecration? Has it happened? Will it happen? What is going on here? Now, I think Michael Brown believes the temple will be rebuilt. If the temple will be rebuilt and it's going to be desecrated sometime in the future, surely he does not think that the church is going to be obligated to temple worship in relation prior to Jesus's return. Like you're going to have to get circumcised and keep Jewish law prior to Jesus's return. I don't see Michael Brown holding to that position. And that's why it's kind of confusing to me. Because I can't see Michael Brown saying that the church is supposed to observe Jewish laws related to the Sabbath. But yet the warning is when you see this abomination of desolations, you're to flee to the hills. Now, the only thing that Michael Brown can be doing is restricting the abomination of desolation to 70 AD, which is a preterist position, which I don't think he's a preterist. So that gives me an interesting problem here. But let's keep going because I'm probably going to preempt myself by going too far too fast. We have to make sure that one of the things we always do in theology is distinguish the church from Israel. You cannot understand end time things correctly, in my mind, if you do not distinguish the program for Israel from the program from the church. They're not the same. So let's understand the flow here of Daniel 9, 26, and 27. Now, let me bring up the whole thing here and show you why I'm picking 9, 26, and 27, because it's only fair that I do that, keep things in context for you. So I'm going to go 9, 25, just to go there. There we go. Now, in 25, you have the beginning of the time clock in Daniel. There are several decrees related to the rebuilding of the temple there. The clock starts with a certain decree. The period of time is broken up into 62 weeks and 7 weeks, which would give you 69 weeks. If you need the math, you have the 7 and the 62. Okay, and that's the breakdown. And that whole 70 weeks, 7 and 62, is 69 weeks. And the 69 weeks refer to Messiah. By the way, there is no question that we're talking about the Messiah here, because the Hebrew is Mashiach Nagid. It's Messiah the Prince. It's a specific reference. The streets will be rebuilt even in troublous times. Now, after the 62 weeks, and here's your 62 weeks, and here's your 62 weeks, or after the 7 weeks, or at the end of the 69 weeks, Messiah is cut off. Now I can go back here and introduce the next 2 verses and the flow of them, knowing that you have some background here. The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city. Okay? And the sanctuary, representative of Jerusalem and the temple. The end will be like a flood. Until the end, desolations are determined. Now, what I want you to see is the Hebrew phrase, the people of the prince, right here. Okay? Now, what you see at the beginning of 27 is then the prince. The prince of who? The prince of the people of the prince, and then the reference switches to the prince. And it doesn't show as nice here as I'd like, but I have the Hebrew phrase there. Okay, so this reference to Daniel is about the people destroying the city, led by their leader, whoever that is, and then the prince of the people will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. That prince is not Rome. Hence, Nissen's question, who is he? The Antichrist. Whether you like it or not, there's a evil prince that is discussed in Daniel 11 that is talked about destroying the temple and desecrating it. That desecration occurs halfway between 1 week of years or 7 weeks. Given the language about the temple and the fact that the prince, a wicked prince, makes an agreement to allow offerings and sacrifices, and then, and I want to fix that, then he axes them. I have added them, but that's because it didn't like the word axes. So let's just fix that. Go there, go here, current slide, and he axes them in the middle of the 7 weeks. This does not fit the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. In other words, this is yet to happen in some way. Now, let's see if we can piece this together and see what we're dealing with. Jesus is discussing an abomination of desolation that has some reference to 70 AD, but is not just 70 AD. So he's asking their question about the temple, but there's a further destruction of the temple that is yet to come. It's a time of trouble for Israel. Now, this is what I don't get with people. If Israel and the church aren't the same thing, then a time of tremendous tribulation for Israel does what to the church? Okay? And if it's a future event, then it's yet to happen. So let's look at these directions. You already mentioned it. You can't have birth. You can't have the Sabbath. And you can't take any clothing. Just get out of Dodge. Now, in a sense, when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, Jews did flee to Petra. And that's when they got the name destroyers or traitors, because they didn't fight under Bar Kokhba. Good for them. They shouldn't have fought under Bar Kokhba that was put forth as Messiah by Rabbi Akiva. But the context of this passage includes features that are not for the church. The observation of the Jewish Sabbath is not incumbent on the church. The Sabbath day's walk, you're only allowed to travel so far on the Sabbath, is not incumbent upon the church. And so these things don't fit a church context. Now, what does that end up doing for me? Well, let's look at the possibilities. What are the possibilities? One possibility is that Israel will be persecuted by the evil prince, and the church will get away totally unscathed. That this character who's this evil prince will persecute Israel, stop worship in the temple, which I've never seen the church obligated to, but will allow Christ to be proclaimed freely. That doesn't seem to make sense to me for some reason. Another possibility is that clearly this passage with its features are distinctly Jewish and refers to Israel. Since Israel is not the church, we have a reason to believe that the church is not present during this time. Now, that one seems a little bit more reasonable to me. That Daniel is referring to very Jewish things. The church is not Israel. So the tribulation period being distinctly Jacob's troubles and for the church, for Israel, is not for the church. And if it's not for the church, then and serves no purpose for the church, then I see no purpose for us being here. I just don't see God as wanting us to suffer for absolutely no reason under conditions that don't really apply to the church anyway. Whereas for Israel, the tribulation period makes perfect sense because it's preparation for Israel's corporate acceptance of Messiah. And remember, Jesus said, "You will not see me until you say, 'Blessed be he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Now, I got a question about this fascination with end time things, so I'll go there. What can we get out of this? Well, we can gather that the period leading up to the Lord's return, even prior to the church, is going to have a level of persecution and apostasy because the disciples are warned to be on their guard. Christians in particular in the United States really need this because we've enjoyed privilege of place in our society. We have enjoyed the protections that the government gives, and our worldview was the predominant worldview. It was the accepted and respected worldview, and so we've gotten very comfortable with the fact that the government should be very much pro the things of our lifestyle and view. I think that is unfortunately, frighteningly, coming to a halt. We will be a less than respected worldview, probably in the eyes of many in the near future. Christians are going to have to get used to the fact that it's going to start being swimming upstream. And along those sorts of lines, it may not be as comfortable as it once was to follow Christ. And so I think that's a very important thing. I'm not trying to pick on people, but I notice the level of inconvenience that people would accept in relation to staying connected to their local church. And frankly, I'm saddened by it. Now, I'm not perfect at it, but how many people just did nothing for several Sundays rather than finding a way to tune in? And how many people are still very comfortable not returning? Not talking about not being able to return, but are you comfortable with no returning whatsoever in your mind? That is bothersome to me. And so we just need to be ready for that. Okay. What we have seen is there's good reason to believe that the tribulation period has little or nothing to do with the church. That Jesus is speaking in general terms, but they point to a time that he has in mind where these things will be amplified, that has become associated through other scriptures and his reference to Daniel with a future time. And that we need to just be ready to follow Jesus even when our society is going to make it highly inconvenient. Not because I like to say this, but because I need to say this. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so that's why it would be important if you were pregnant or was the Sabbath, because a Jewish person during the tribulation that is following Messiah is still going to be not a part of what we are a part of per se. There's going to be a temple rebuilt. They're going to be living a very Jewish lifestyle, and they would not be allowed to travel very far. But if they were part of the church, then a Sabbath day's walk means nothing. So let's get on to some other things. Sorry about that. Let me bring me back up. Okay, I'm going to just stick me up here. I'm going to try. There we are. Let's look at a few questions that have come up. Jack Ray's never understood the fascination with the end times. We're supposed to be about the work of God no matter what. That is true. Why are people fascinated about the end? One, we like to know what's coming. Let's face it, nobody likes to be surprised by bad news. We want to prepare ourselves. We want to be ready. If someone told you someone was going to rob your house, you might actually, put some additional security measures on. So we want to be ready. We're also fascinated with the future. We as human beings are always fascinated with the future. We're supposed to be about God's work no matter what. But the question is, what is the church? What is Israel? And how does Israel get restored? The answer to understanding the place of Israel and the plan of God is important, although obsessing on every detail of the end times may be less important. Okay. By the way, the name of Michael Brown's book is called Not Afraid of the Antichrist. If the church is going to be removed before the tribulation period, I don't have to be afraid of the Antichrist either. If the church is here during the tribulation, then I might be a little bit more nervous. So really, the title of the book actually works very good the other way. Now, this was not a detailed examination of the case. So let me be honest with you. If I had, it might be fun to invite Michael Wingfield on, if he would so do it. Mike's not real big on the internet, so I probably could never get him to do that. But it would be really great to deal with. So that's the question there. Some other questions may have come up. Doesn't look like a lot of questions. Doesn't look like a really large audience. So maybe people are not fascinated with the end times. Maybe that's a great lesson for tonight. People don't really care. But that's where we're at. Comments, curiosities, rabbit trails. Does not look like it. So I'm just checking. Okay. That's a real weak overview of the Olivet discourse. Mike would have tried to parse it down to the nth degree. I wanted to give you an overview and make it practical. Be watchful, because the things that compose the tribulation period are going to be seen before this tribulation period and were experienced by the disciples. So, all right. Well, I'm thrilled that Jimmy was here over on Facebook. That's great. And if there are no questions, I know that we're taking off a little early, but there is something I need to do. And I make sure this happens. I'm going to put the thank yous up again. There are a lot of folks behind the scenes that are supporting us via Chosen People, but they're not on this channel at this time, so they don't end up in the thing. But you are very appreciated. Everybody who helps us out is very appreciated, even a one-time gift to Chosen People, money to go ahead and upgrade the equipment. Okay, some of you have done that. You're staring at the camera that some of you got for me. So I want to be very clear. I'm not ignoring anybody. I'm not trying to ignore anybody. But I do want to go ahead and put the brand up. This is a Patreon perk, so I need to keep my word. Okay, well, I wanted to say that thank you. Thank you to everybody who helps make this possible in all the ways that you do. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a little extra time for supper, hot chocolate, whatever the case may be. I will see you next week. I hope to have a little bit more editing software so I can edit those clips more for you. God bless and Erev Tov.